Captured. The suspect in Charlie Kirk's murder now in custody. What we know about his background, arrest, and the charges he will face. Is this a moment for reflection and change? Utah's Republican governor says it is, while members of Congress fret openly about their safety. And we dig deeper into Kirk's rise to prominence and his clout in President Trump's Washington with Robert Draper of the New York Times. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. The father turned in the son. The son, according to authorities, is the leading suspect in the assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. That means the father handed his son over to authorities, knowing at best he would likely spend the rest of his life in prison or face, as President Trump called for today, the death penalty. And however you parse family relations or pursuits of justice, that is a heavy decision. Many details emerged today about the suspect, and we will get to them with our best reporters as well as our security and legal analysts. And we will talk to Robert Draper of the New York Times, who wrote the definitive profile of Charlie Kirk and came to know this complex and still evolving force in American politics very well. Utah's Republican Governor Spencer Cox announced the news of the arrest of the suspect this morning, confessing that since Kirk's death, he had been racked with anger and sadness. Cox was asked if Kirk's assassination in front of some 3,000 spectators in an amphitheater at Utah Valley University was a watershed moment in America.
The question is, what kind of watershed? And that chapter remains to be written. Is this the end of a dark chapter in our history or the beginning of a darker chapter in our history? Look, I mean, if you look at true political assassinations in this country of someone of this stature, this feels a lot like the late 60s. And having one so gruesomely displayed on camera in all of our hands and in all of our pockets, we are not wired as human beings biologically, historically. We have not evolved in a way that we are capable of processing those types of violent imagery. Social media is a cancer on our society right now. And I would encourage people to log off, turn off, touch grass, hug a family member, go out and do good in your community. This is our moment. Do we escalate or do we find an off-ramp? And again, it's a choice. It's a choice. And every one of us gets to make that choice.
In the natural world, a watershed is a collection point of rain and snow from higher elevations. In the metaphorical world, it is a dividing line. I sometimes turn to poets in times of trouble, and this week certainly qualified. The first poet ever to treat watershed as a metaphor was Henry Wadsworth Longfellow in 1878. The poem, The Two Rivers, it reads in part, "Midnight, the outpost of advancing day, the frontier town and citadel of night, the watershed of time from which the streams of yesterday and tomorrow take their way, one to the land of promise and of light, one to the land of darkness and of dreams." Cox spoke of the promise of light. A father confronted the land of darkness and nightmare and turned his son in. And we confront, as Cox suggested, the watershed before us. To the details of what we learned today about the suspect, we turn to Carter Evans, who joins us from Orem, Utah. Carter?
Major, we've got some information from two law enforcement sources about how this all went down last night. We are told that Tyler Robinson's father saw his photo and confronted his son about it, and his son admitted that it was him in the photo. Now, apparently, Tyler's father told him that he should turn himself in. And Tyler responded by saying that he would rather take his own life. Now, at that point, Tyler's father apparently called a youth pastor who was very familiar with him. The both of them were able to talk to Tyler Robinson, calm him down. The youth pastor, who is also a court officer, by the way, called the U.S. Marshal's office. They came and detained Tyler until the FBI could take him into custody.
Carter, there is tremendous interest and curiosity about Tyler Robinson and what, if any, political axes he had to grind. Do we know anything about that?
So one thing that the governor said today, when authorities interviewed his family, they mentioned that he had become much more politically active lately. And they mentioned a recent family dinner where he mentioned that Charlie Kirk was going to be speaking here, and he talked about how much he hated Charlie Kirk. And that took the family by surprise. Now, I asked the governor if he was cooperating, if he was talking with authorities, and he said he wouldn't release that information. I also asked if he talked about a motive, a specific motive, and he said he can't release that right now.
There was also a conversation at the press conference this morning, Carter, about bullet casings. What, if anything, did that suggest or reveal?
Yeah, so this is interesting, and we've got an image we're going to put up on the screen now to show you what was written on the bullet casings. The first one says there, "Hey, fascist, catch." So it is believed that these represent some of his political leanings, but authorities would not go into details about exactly what was meant by the inscriptions on these shell casings, or if Robinson had explained it to them.
With all of our comprehensive reporting from the scene, Carter Evans, I'm deeply indebted. Thank you. Weijia Jiang joins me now from New York, where she's been traveling with the president. Weijia, I want to play for you sound that you're familiar with, and my audience might be as well, but it's important to memorialize the president this morning, not only saying what happened, but what he hopes will happen in the future, at least judicially. Let's listen.
I think with a high degree of certainty, we have him in custody, right? In custody. Everyone did a great job. We worked with the local police, the governor. Everybody did a great job. I hope he's going to be found guilty, I would imagine, and I hope he gets the death penalty.
Weijia, were others in the White House aware of this? Obvious that the president was going to go on, but talk this specifically and this prospectively about how the scales of justice might actually render a judgment on this case?
Major, watching that interview live, it was apparent that the president himself wasn't sure how much information he was going to disclose when he sat down on that set. And that is because he said he didn't find out any of these details until about 5 minutes before that interview started. After the interview started, he actually started talking about the baseball game, the New York Yankees baseball game that he attended last night here in the Bronx, before the conversation shifted to Charlie Kirk. And the president initially said, I'm not going to reveal too many details. He said, I don't want to get sued, acknowledged that the investigation was ongoing. But as he kept talking, he continued to reveal more and more information. And so not only did he say that he had a high degree of certainty that somebody was in custody, he continued to lay out how it unfolded, including some of those details we just heard from Carter. So the president disclosed that it was someone close to the shooter who alerted authorities, and that ultimately it was the suspect's father who convinced him to turn himself into police, Major. And again, remember, this is the first time that we had heard anything about a suspect being in custody. And it wasn't from investigators or the FBI or the governor of Utah, who was leading the press remarks, but it was from the president, who, as we have been reporting, Major, obviously also has a personal stake in this because he was so close to Charlie Kirk.
Weijia Jiang in New York, thank you very much. I want to bring in CBS News national security contributor Sam Vinograd and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Tom Dupree. Tom, I also want to play for you sound from the FBI Director, Kash Patel, from this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, let's listen to that.
We delivered, and I'm proud to be their leader, and I'm proud to be the director of the FBI. To my friend Charlie Kirk, rest now, brother. We have the watch, and I'll see you in Valhalla.
Tom, I want to ask you about these two things. One, the president said, and one, Kash Patel said, because it suggests a personalization, which, in my experience, and I covered cops, police, law enforcement when I was a young journalist, even in a community where members of law enforcement or prosecutors knew a victim, they tried to depersonalize it, to suggest to the community, we are going to handle this based on the facts, and we are not personally motivated or involved in this case. Is that what you heard?
This is obviously a horrific incident that affected the president and the FBI director, and I think a lot of people in the administration in very deep and profound ways. And so, you know, on one hand, I think it's very understandable that they react in those personal terms. But to your point, look, I mean, you're right that it is not the traditional approach in law enforcement. Traditionally in law enforcement, if you have even, you know, a fellow police officer who's slain in the line of duty.
I covered cases like that.
Right. You typically would disassociate.
And the reason they would say that is because we want to preserve the best possible prosecutorial arc for this case. So there's no point at which someone could say there's something that's been altered because of a personal motive.
Right. And look, I think, I mean, as we've seen from kind of the moment the administration came in, is they don't always follow the traditional paths of law enforcement. You know, we've seen this in the Justice Department. We've seen this in the FBI. And I think what we saw here today and we've seen in the last few days is just the fact that this was such a personal event for these people, for the president, for the FBI director, and for others, that they are, you know, not following what people would say is kind of, you know, the traditional playbook in a horrible situation like this.
And Samantha, what happened on this case was not only the typical investigative mechanisms that you and I have talked about for the last 2 nights on this program, but the public being a vital resource, seeing, hearing, and then acting of their own volition.
Certainly. And despite advanced technology, despite advanced investigatory tactics, the public and publicizing images of this individual did turn out to be a game changer. And the public played a critical role in this individual being recognized by his family and then ultimately being turned into law enforcement. That doesn't in any way degrade all the other investigatory work that was underway, but it was certainly a key factor.
Did it surprise you that the suspect, now in custody, was still in the state of Utah, had fled some distance, but not a considerable distance, and was still in the presence of people who would clearly recognize him?
Major, every horrific violent event has a different profile. Mm-hmm. We have seen so many, unfortunately, mass shootings. We've seen so many politically motivated attacks. We don't yet know the motive in this case. One thing I do want to note is that in today's threat environment, and Tom is likely familiar with this too, it's different. We historically used to see offenders that were motivated by one ideology. In today's threat environment, we are actually seeing individuals radicalize and mobilize violence based upon multiple, sometimes competing ideologies. So when we look at the pattern of an offender, no 2 cases are the same. And in this moment, what we need to do is let the process play out. And also, once this individual is brought to justice, take a step back and try to consider how this could have been prevented in the first place.
Tom, please jump in on any of those points.
Yeah, I completely agree with Sam. I think that there's a tendency a lot of times, I think it's just a human nature, that you want to fit motives into kind of a box, a preconceived box, to say that this person had a very pure political motive that conforms to whatever ideology we think, when in fact, to Sam's point, it's much more complex than that a lot of times. People act for a variety of motives. You often can have, I don't know in this case or not, but you often have mental illness playing a role. So there can be just a variety of different factors that motivate someone to commit and act what, in my judgment, was just of pure evil and malice yesterday.
Does motive, is that a requirement for prosecutors to bring a successful case in this matter?
Well, yes, but I think in this case, they're not going to have a problem proving that this was clearly an intentional, premeditated act of violence. I mean, who knows what the defense lawyers will argue? Will they try to argue that he was insane or crazy? Maybe they will. Maybe they have no better argument than that. But at least based on what we have seen, the circumstances, the precision with which this evil person acted, it seems like it would be tough to argue that he was crazy when he did something that just seems to have been so carefully premeditated and just downright evil.
And that's a critical point. This individual and most offenders of this kind don't radicalize spontaneously. They radicalize and mobilize over a period of time. And as investigators piece through how Charlie Kirk was assassinated, they will be talking to his friends and family. They will be reviewing his social media platforms. They will try to review encrypted platforms to try to see if he told anyone what he was planning to do. The indicators of radicalization and mobilization were present because, again, the point is to try to learn from this horrific tragedy, try to educate the public on what to look out for so that we prevent it from happening.
Some of the video released was after the shooting and the methodical, calm way that this suspected assailant came down from the roof and walked away. Did that tell you or suggest anything to you, Sam?
It certainly told me that he had canvassed the scene. He knew what he was doing. He didn't just go up there and look around and say, what do I do now? He clearly had a plan. He reportedly had a change of clothes. He knew how to get down. He calmly left the scene. He wasn't frantic. That does show a level of planning and premeditation.
Right. I think it's going to undermine any attempt by the defense to argue insanity, and obviously it's going to undermine any attempt by the defense to portray this as some sort of crime of passion, which is what in murder cases you often do. But this clearly, indisputably was a carefully premeditated act of violence.
And a horrible one at that. Tom Dupree, Sam Vinograd, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Still to come, lawmakers in Congress are fearful in the aftermath of Kirk's killing. Events are being canceled, and anxiety is vocalized in new ways. We'll learn more. Plus, how Charlie Kirk became a college campus sensation and youth vote mobilizer. A close look at an outside and outsized MAGA power broker. As New York Times reporter Robert Draper. And this week, you might have missed this, President Trump boasted, quote, no inflation. New data counters that. A longtime GOP economist and presidential advisor joins us for part 2 of a conversation on America's economic health. All that coming up. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to The Takeout. Members of Congress are now canceling events and looking for more security. Some openly question whether or not they should conduct or participate in any kind of open-air event. And here's why. The trend line is unmistakable. Political violence has become more prevalent. Now, we've put together a timeline, and I want to acknowledge up front, this timeline that we've put together may not include every instance of politically motivated or politically influenced action of violence that you can remember or think of. But ours begins January 8th, 2011. Democratic Congresswoman Gabby Giffords was shot in the head during a constituent event. Giffords survived. 6 people lost their lives. The gunman harbored a personal animosity toward Giffords and the government. On June 14th, 2017, gunfire rang out during a congressional baseball practice in Alexandria, Virginia. Louisiana Congressman Republican Steve Scalise was shot and very badly wounded. The gunman made sure that it was Republicans on the field before opening fire. The last 14 months, we have seen 2 assassination attempts on Donald Trump when running for president. One in Butler, Pennsylvania, where a bullet came within inches of taking his life. And just months later, the Secret Service stopped a would-be assassin near Trump's golf course in West Palm Beach, Florida. And just this past June, Minnesota House Democratic leader Melissa Hortman and her husband were fatally shot. State Senator John Hoffman and his wife were injured by the same assailant. Nicole Killian joins me now from Capitol Hill. Nicole, you talked to members of Congress today. This is the dominant conversation right now among members of the House and the Senate. What have you learned?
Yeah, well, this hits really close to home for a lot of these members, precisely for that timeline that you just laid out. And even in the wake of the Kirk killing, of course, many members have expressed both shock and concern. Congresswoman Nancy Mace, for instance, released a series of threatening phone calls and voice messages that she has received in the wake of this killing. You have other members like AOC, Senator Ruben Gallego, canceling events that they had scheduled for this weekend, political events. So this really is hitting deep for many of these members. You know, before Charlie Kirk was shot and killed, I did have a chance to sit down with a pair of bipartisan lawmakers, Congressman Tim Burchett of Tennessee and Michigan Democrat Hillary Scholten. And, you know, they talked about this political climate and how we got here. Take a listen to that conversation. What do you think is behind this rise in political violence?
Just hatred, just the breakdown of society. You know, I can blame it on the left and they can blame it on the right, but reality is it's just, you know, and I think part of it too is, and my 6 years of undergraduate studies at the University of Tennessee, I had a psychology class and we talked about how people would, they're angry about something and then they see us on TV or something, and then we're walking through the mall or something, and then their anger is directed at us, and that's something we'll not be able to control.
And you can't deny the humanity in another person, but when people become radicalized, and it is on the right and on the left, you know, it is a breakdown in recognizing the humanity of the individual, and in this case, you know, the representative who is speaking for you. So we need to be able to continue to engage, you know, to talk to our constituents.
And so they both acknowledge this is not a partisan issue. This affects Democrats as much as it affects Republicans. And, you know, they both talked to me about the importance of having inter-party dialogue as a way to maybe cool the temperature down, if you will. They also both expressed a need for additional security. Of course, the House just this month and last month during the recess is testing out a new security pilot program. So both of them told me that is welcome relief. It gives them a little extra money to hire personal security if needed or make security upgrades at their homes.
Nicole Killian on Capitol Hill, thank you very much.
Roll the clock back to January 1, and this wasn't a third world nation, which is they've asserted. This wasn't an economy that was dead in the water. It was growing at 2.5%.
Former CBO director and economic advisor to George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush on Trump's economy and tariffs. More of my conversation with Douglas Holtz-Eakin next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Thanks for staying with us. American consumers haven't felt this bad about the economy since May. That, according to the University of Michigan's closely watched consumer sentiment measure. It fell almost 5% from August to September, and it is down more than 20% from this time last year. Worries about the job market and higher inflation drove this trend. Yesterday, the Labor Department announced consumer prices in August were up 2.9% annually. That's the hottest inflation has come in since January. The major indices were relatively flat today, but are up overall this week, and that is likely because investors anticipate that the Federal Reserve will lower interest rates next week. Rate cuts are something President Trump has long and repeatedly called for the central bank to do. President Trump's position on interest rates and the overall economy, for that matter, are, as you might imagine, under intense scrutiny. One of our nation's foremost conservative economists, former CBO Director Douglas Holtz-Eakin, says in the first term, that is to say President Trump's first term, he did, quote, some astounding things for the U.S. economy. Fast forward to Trump 2.0, and his views are quite negative. Here's our conversation. Doug, are you a never-Trumper economist?
I wasn't. I was never one of those who said, no, 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 no. And indeed, in his first term in office, there were some things that he did I thought were astounding. The deregulation was a real thing. I didn't think it was possible. The 17 tax bill is one of the best business tax reforms you could see. It's not perfect, but it was a big step forward. I didn't like picking a trade war with China. I think it hurt the U.S. in the end. But it was on the policy, things you could evaluate, favor some, not favor others. I came into this term in the same way.
And then what happened?
He made a series of decisions, none of which I think are the right way to go. I didn't love what they did with the Reconciliation Act, the One Big Beautiful Bill. That was unlike the 17 bill, which was a real tax reform, treat income equally, get rates down. Now we're going to have special treatment for tips, special treatment for overtime, special treatment for seniors. It's at the antithesis of tax reform. And so I don't think we're going to get much out of that. I think the tariffs are a big mistake. They're a big economic mistake. They're a big international relations mistake. I mean, we've alienated neighbors and allies. So, it makes me just think he's making bad decisions. I don't know why.
Are the tariffs put in motion by the president legal from your vantage point?
There are some that are unquestionably legal. So steel, aluminum, autos, so-called Section 232 national security things.
Right.
Has the authority to do that?
Because there's a process in law and a process in procedure where you investigate, establish a case, make a judgment, and if you follow those rules under 232, they are legally bulletproof, more or less.
They are, and the Congress has said, here's what you can do. We have the authority to levy tariffs. You know, where the Constitution put that authority. We're going to let you have it under these circumstances. And they spelled it out, and he does it. He can put in the tariffs.
But when the president came in for the second term, as you well know, he said there's an economic emergency, and my powers to tariff are essentially limitless because I've declared an emergency.
He said, I'm going to use the international economic emergency powers, but that law does not contain the word tariffs. It does contain the word regulate, but no one typically associates regulation with what the House Ways and Means Committee usually does. So number one, was it really an emergency? We'd had these current account deficits for 20 years. Didn't appear to be a sudden crisis. Number two, did he have the authority? I think the answer is no. Two levels of the courts have decided no. Supreme Court gets the final say. We'll see how it works out.
And the president has said to the Supreme Court, if you overrule me, you're going to throw the economy into the ditch. And we're going to have to give back all this tariff revenue. It's going to be a calamity. So don't you dare do it. Whatever the law says, don't do it. Don't cross me. Don't cross the U.S. economy.
Not an argument that I like or buy. I mean, roll the clock back to January 1, and this wasn't a third world nation, which as they've asserted. This wasn't an economy that was dead in the water. It was growing at 2.5%. It's growing a lot less now. So it's not obvious that getting rid of the tariffs is a bad idea. I'd get rid of them tomorrow.
I have described on this program delicately the president's attitude toward the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell as jawboning. I think that is being delicate.
Yeah.
Is this a dangerous thing the president is doing? Because his administration will say, look, we're critical of the Federal Reserve. We are empowered to be critical of the Federal Reserve, and that's all we're doing is we're offering our opinion. We're not threatening its independence. How do you view it?
You know, I've worked for 2 White Houses, and presidents regularly complain about the Fed, and Fed chairmen are regularly invited to have lunch with the Secretary of the Treasury, where it is explained to them that they're doing a terrible job and endangering the future of their boss, and, you know, go back and get it right. And they typically ignore them and go do their job. And so at that level, I thought the criticisms of the president were fine. But there's a key moment when it really shifted, and that was when he started openly saying, I'm going to get somebody who's going to cut rates. And suddenly we had members of the Board of Governors saying, I want to cut rates at the next meeting, in a way that members of the Board of Governors don't usually do it. They're not that blunt. They're usually very, very, very restrained in their comments. They don't tip their hand. And suddenly I was thinking, is he saying that because that's the right thing to do or because he wants to be the chair? And now you're thinking about the Fed wrong. You're not thinking about the monetary policy and the economics. You're thinking about the politics. Makes the Fed less effective. Their job is to convey to American businesses and households the future of the economy and what they're going to do to support it, not to run for chairmanship. So, yeah, it's done some damage. And the next chair is devalued automatically because the presumption will be they cut a deal with the president to get the job.
And for someone watching this, Doug, on their phone, their laptop at home, and they're like, so why should I care? What's the danger of what you're describing?
Well,
a politicized, fearful Fed.
A politicized, fearful Fed doesn't do the right thing for the person sitting in their home watching on the phone. They do the right thing for the occupant of the Oval Office. Last politicized Fed we had them. Arthur Burns is notorious in Fed history for doing whatever Richard Nixon needed to succeed politically. And in the 70s, we had sustained high unemployment, sustained high inflation. That's what a politicized Fed gives you.
Doug Holk-Eaklund, I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
President Trump's personal loss, how his deeply personal reaction to Charlie Kirk's killing shows just how important Kirk was inside the White House and to the Trump family. That's next here on The Takeout. Welcome back. Charlie Kirk was a fixture in Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0. He formed a close bond with President Trump and many of his children. As Robert Draper writes in the New York Times, Kirk, before his death, had, quote, seamlessly woven himself into the family fabric. Donald Trump Jr. was especially close with Kirk. Kirk served as Don Jr.'s scheduler back in 2016. I remember that time. Before Charlie Kirk arrived, Don Jr.'s schedule was a mess, and he really brought order and discipline to it back when he was only 22 years old. Robert Draper joins me now on set. I'm glad that he's here. He's author and staff writer for the New York Times. You paid very close attention to Charlie Kirk, wrote a very, very long profile of him. What attracted you to him as a subject of journalism? And what do you want my audience to know about him as a force, a young force in American politics?
Sure, Major. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that Charlie Kirk was one of the 4 or 5 most influential people in Republican politics. So that in and of itself would have made him of interest to me. But he was 31 also, and had achieved all that he had achieved beginning at the tender age of 18. And I think, you know, more than anything else, Major, it's not just that he was, you know, an advisor. He was that. He was a campaign organizer. He was also a youth organizer too, but he was like a real presence, projected a kind of dynamism and youth that one doesn't see much in politics and certainly not in the Republican Party.
And Robert, it's been my experience that many, many Republicans are dependent on President Trump politically. Charlie Kirk was not dependent on President Trump politically. He was a force of his own. They were aligned and associated, but it's my impression that he didn't need any particular promises kept by the president or favors extended to him to continue to be as he was.
For the most part, that's true. It's certainly the case that Turning Point USA's fortunes were very much tied to Trump, and that prior to Trump running for the presidency in 2016, Turning Point USA was a small, growing, but not terribly effective or influential youth organization. Once they started having these big events and the keynote speaker at the events was Trump, then they grew exponentially, as did their influence. But you're still right that Kirk was a force of his own, and that the attraction that he had, particularly to young people sort of playing footsie with the idea of conservatism on campuses, was that Kirk really made it his business, made it his mission to try to make conservatism cool, which kind of seemed like a laughable thing back in the Obama era when he first started out. And for that matter, wasn't the kind of thing that you would have thought that Trump would have been a great protagonist in. That was really Kirk's doing.
If you were to explain to my audience how that coolness came to be personified by Charlie Kirk, how would you describe it?
Well, first of all, he would point out that liberalism had ceased to be cool, that liberalism was becoming more of a closed ecosystem, a place where you had to watch what you were saying, where in the Republican right in Charlie Kirk's events, you didn't have to. You didn't have to abide by a rule book of political correctness. But beyond that, the events that he threw were like nothing else that we had seen before in liberal or Republican politics. They were like rock concerts, with strobe lights and smoke and all of this, just tons of special effects that made people feel like they were a part of something really happening.
How much of it also vectored, Robert, off of Charlie offering what he thought was a response to the sense among young American men that there was a wilderness of masculinity?
Oh, I think that was crucial. And I think that Kirk was, I think, one of the chief protagonists early on, Major, in beating that drum that young men in particular were being put in a state of apology. That that their turn was up, and Kirk essentially said to this generation, no, that's not the way it should be. That's not the way it has to be, and we're going to make sure that the wokeism of the left will not overcome and become this central feature of your life. We're not going to have it.
On that score, was he an exaggerator?
Sure. Yes, he performed in the attention economy, and in that economy, you are incentivized to say things that are outrageous, to say things for effect, and so and look, Kirk had a program that he would do 3 or 4 days a week. He was growing his audience, and very quickly Charlie learned that you don't do that by being moderate, by being guarded with what you say, but instead by being outrageous.
Here's the very good news. Robert Draper, the New York Times, is staying with me on this Friday with some of Charlie Kirk's most controversial takes and how they collided with his Christianity. Kind of an evolving story about Charlie Kirk. That's next. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to Takeout. I'm very grateful that Robert Draper is still with us. Robert, Charlie Kirk, 31, an evolving person. Where do you think that evolution was going to take him?
Sure. Let's start with the fact that when he began Turning Point USA, when he began doing this stuff at the age of 18, he was a Ron Paul libertarian Tea Partier. And he moved from that to being kind of more into Ted Cruz. Then Trump came along, and he became part of the MAGA movement. I think that some of his positions were becoming further rightward, I suppose you could say. I mean, he certainly believed, for example, that Muslims, the growing Muslim population in America, presented a threat to American values. He believed that transgender people were mentally ill. But in other ways, I mean, he also, Which is what provoked the criticism of him, that you're exclusionary. You're not really for free speech. You're only for speech that you
want to feel comfortable engaging with, but others you are really comfortable excluding.
That's right. They're very true. But at the same time, I think there was more texture to his America First views as he began to explore what does it mean to be a populist, so yes, that could mean, among other things, sealing off the border so that fewer immigrants would drive up wages. But it also meant, things like increasing access to child care, increasing wages themselves, including an increase in the minimum wage. He was discussing all of this stuff. And so I think that he was beginning to explore what does it really mean beyond the campaign slogan of America First and being for the average American person who's been left behind.
In your profile, you write about how COVID was a singular event for Charlie. I want to read a part of it. COVID was for me a lot of thinking and reading time. While the whole civilization was collapsing, and I saw the wokies appealing to a moral order that they said was true and good, and I said, well, we think ours is. The thing that strikes me there is the whole civilization was collapsing.
Yeah.
Not everyone dealing with COVID thought it was all collapsing, but Charlie and many young conservatives and old conservatives, but especially young conservatives, thought it might be.
They did. And as someone who travels, around the world a lot, I'm very sensitized to the fact there are many countries who did not react this way. But in America, I think where so many Americans are attuned to personal liberty and thus to the infringement on personal liberty by being told you can't send your kids to school, you can't go to church on Sundays, you have to maintain social distances, wear a mask in public places. This was an affront, and I think that Kirk really did see it as a teetering towards a kind of social collapse, and he was very disappointed. I remember so well when that was like a 10-minute screed that he gave to me uninterrupted, and in the course of it, he expressed his disappointment in the church. He felt like that the evangelicals in particular had abdicated their position of influence by basically just acquiescing and closing down their churches. He was so upset that had happened.
Very quickly, do you think 10 years, 20 years from now, Charlie Kirk's name will be mentioned by young conservatives or middle-aged conservatives with the kind of reverence that many of our generation thought of Robert F. Kennedy?
It's hard to say, but I mean, it's certainly
youthful, meaningful.
Absolutely, yeah. No, who projected? I mean, and look, I think that was the main part of Kirk's appeal, that he showed up on these campuses, that he engaged with people, that he felt like an active, dynamic presence. There's been talk about a statue being built of him. Who knows if this will ever happen? But it would not totally stun me if he were viewed in an almost canonized sense as someone who brought vitality and youth to a conservative movement that had been lacking it.
15 seconds. Anything that Democrats should learn from the Charlie Kirk example?
Well, yes. I mean, I think go on to campuses and do as Charlie Kirk does, which is to say, those people who disagree with me, come to the front of the line. And those are the people I want to hear from first. Those are the people I want to debate. Yeah.
When you and I were both young, campuses were for the progressives, and now they've become places where conservatives want to feel more comfortable, and Charlie Kirk was part of that vanguard. Robert Draper, The New York Times, I'm deeply grateful to you for coming in. Thank you very much. A baseball break from politics, how a day at the Diamond could be the reprieve we might all need in tough political times. My conversation with Baltimore Orioles owner David Rubenstein, next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. The killing of conservative political activist Charlie Kirk underscored the frightful toll of political division and fear. But in a conversation I had with billionaire and Baltimore Orioles owner David Rubenstein just before the shooting, we discussed how sports transcends politics in terms of creating shared spaces where political uniforms are set aside. Take a listen. I want to talk to you about sports in America and cohesion in America, because it strikes me that sports is one of the few places anymore where we can all get along regardless of our political attitudes.
Well, we can all agree that sports is really probably more popular than they've ever been in terms of people watch more sports, live stream more sports, attend more sports events, bet on more sports events than ever before. And it's one of the few things that people all agree on, that sports is a good thing.
Now, you are not overly sentimental. I am not overly sentimental. And we don't want to get gauzy and pretend that we can think of sports as the way to solve all of America's problems. But it does seem to me to be a convening place that could have some value in restoring a sense of civic connectedness.
There's no doubt that people feel if you're connected to sports, you're connected to the American people. So what do politicians often do? They go to sporting events. You'll see presidents of the United States, many of them go to football games, they'll go to a tennis match.
Well, you're going to win, I'll tell you what.
And I think presidents and senior government officials feel if you get connected to a sports event and a sports team, it doesn't hurt your popularity. And so politicians want to be popular. Going to a sporting event connects you with the American people.
And I've come across some recent polling data that indicates that people who follow sports are more civically engaged, they're more politically engaged, they vote more often. They're just more connected to the fundamentals of what America and its experiment is all about.
Well, as an owner of a team, maybe we should require more people to attend sporting events because it make them a better citizen. Maybe that's a good idea. I hadn't thought of that before, but that's a good idea. I'm going to work on that.
Okay, good. Last time we talked, David, President Trump was about to be inaugurated, and you were relatively sanguine about how the second iteration of President Trump's presidency would go. Are you still sanguine?
Well, he's different than he was the first term. The first term, he had never been in office before. He had a lot of people who had been in government before around him. He wanted people who knew more about government than he did. He didn't know much at that time. He's now been president for 4 years before. Now he's in his second term, and he's bringing different kinds of people who he feels more comfortable with. So the second term is different than the first term, for sure, in many ways.
Different bad, different good?
I won't categorize it or say it pejoratively or positively. I would say it's different. It's different because he's much more self-assured, much more confident of his judgment, and he knows what he wants to do, as opposed to the first time around. I think he was feeling his way. He did some good things in the first term, some things I wouldn't agree with necessarily. In the second term, he knows what he wants to do, and he's proceeding to do it. And some people like it, some people don't.
You think deeply and write frequently about the arc of America's history, its story, its ambitions, its faults. David, I don't need to tell you, there is a pretty intense conversation going on right now about what is the strength of our institutions, what is the direction of our country, are things that we once valued and assumed were permanent or falling apart before our very eyes? How would you assess that?
Any given time in history, people are always saying the world is falling apart. This happens lots of times. I would say today the United States is in reasonably good shape. We are the envy of the world in many areas, not every area. I think many of our universities are the best in the world. I think our technology companies are the best in the world. I think right now American young people, I think increasingly are well educated and I think are ambitious and building new companies. So I wouldn't say the country's in any peril. I would say you can always do better, and certain things I would change if I was president of the United States, but I'm not going to be president of the United States. I'm too young. I'm only 76 years old. You need to be older.
Well, certainly it appears that way. And you don't feel that our institutions are under any greater threat than they have been in the past?
Well, some institutions have some challenges for sure, but I think it's too early to say that the institutions are going to be falling apart. We have a great resilience in this country, and while there are challenges from time to time, I think that the resilience of the country and the American people will help these institutions get through the challenges that they have at this time. And remember, we've seen this kind of thing before. Many times institutions are challenged, they survive, they come back stronger. And I think many of the institutions we're now seeing as being somewhat challenged will come back stronger after a while.
You can catch my full interview with Baltimore Orioles owner David Rubenstein on your favorite podcast platform. That's it for The Takeout.